Well, without further ado, here we have Diane Christofore and Louis Kemp here from the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. And I will let them introduce themselves and the work that we do, the work that they do, so they can just dive right in.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here with you all. I'm Diane, and I'm the Executive Director of Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. And we're a nonprofit, and we are based in Northfield, Minnesota. We work, our primary focus is in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota right now, but we also work nationally and internationally with what we call the Poultry-Centered Regenerative Agriculture model. The nonprofit was founded in 2018 by Rahil Nada Haslam Mariquin. I believe he spoke as a keynote speaker at a PFG early on in the beginning of this event. And he'll also be speaking Friday at 10:30 for anybody that's interested in taking a deep dive on ecosystem development and philosophy about creating synergies across the supply chain and really looking at the indigenous wisdom as a grounding force and how we can create the future of food systems. Today, Louis and I are going to be diving into how we apply that learning and the foundation of the RAA, both on the landscape and through the business enterprises that the RAA is stimulating and incubating. So our mission, though, is to scale regenerative poultry in the movement to provide a farmer-driven model that showcases regenerative agriculture as a transformational shift needed to balance our ecosystems at large. And I think really important when you think about the mission is that the farmer-driven aspect of this is where we start the model and build out from there. And that's one of the reasons why working with Savannah Institute and understanding how important different partnerships are and bringing forward a perennial future is, and also demonstrating how that can impact our ecosystems at large. So, Louis, if you want to go to the next slide. This is a graphic taken from our annual report, which I think is important when you start to think about what ecosystem development looks like. The priorities of our programming include training and extension services. So we do host a regenerative poultry training cohort that Louis leads. We also do on-farm training in the model. We are doing a lot of research and development with an awesome team of scientists that are based most at Carleton, Freshwater Society, and Mankato State University, measuring and monitoring the impact that regenerative poultry has on soil and water systems. And the biggest and most daunting aspect of the work that we're doing is enterprise management. And so if you look at business enterprises, the center line here, you'll see the whole gauntlet of different supply chain partners that make up a food system. And in 2021, the first bottleneck that we noticed in really scaling regenerative poultry was the lack of small and mid-sized processing. So we oversee and operate a processing facility, which I'll touch on towards the end of this presentation. And so Iroquois Valley is a great partner and sponsor for this because they've been a key financial partner when it comes to capital and the work that we've been doing. And the premier demonstration farm, which is Rahil's farm in Northfield, Minnesota, was actually acquired due to the help of Iroquois Valley being able to come in at the right time to acquire the landscape and the farm there, which now currently has 3 coops on it that Louis is going to show you what that looks like. And we're planning on continuing to develop that as a place that people can come and actually learn how to raise chicken in this regenerative way. So with that, I'll pass it over to Louis. Today, I really want to, for all of you in the room that are thinking about how can you integrate livestock with agroforestry and perennial crops, give you an example of how that's happening. And if you're interested, please reach out to us because we can definitely always go deeper into this model.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Hopefully I won't take up the whole time and we can leave some time for questions at the end too. But my name is Kemp. So I'm the Farm Enterprise and Engagement Director for the RAA. I just joined the organization about 6 months ago. So I jumped in, and my position is to work directly with the farmers, engage with them. We've got a whole big body of training material that was developed before I even joined that needed to be utilized and help everyone that's already participating in the system with technical assistance. It is a pretty technical intensive production system, but I'm also a part of some of our bringing new farmers in. So Diane mentioned the cohort that I've been leading. So that's been my biggest first project since I've joined the organization. But we have about 15 participants where I made a curriculum out of all of the training videos and production manuals that were already at my disposal. Spent the first few months combing through that, making some more usable sheets, checklists, things that can actually be used for the production system. But the 15 participants, farmers, but also someone from the Savannah Institute, working with some other partner organizations, but we're walking through the material together. And we've been meeting every couple weeks and in the evening and having discussions, bringing in guest speakers and making sure everyone can digest the material and really feel confident moving forward and using the system. So when I joined, there were already 9 farmers engaged in Wisconsin and Minnesota mainly. Most of which are planning on scaling up for the next year or two by adding another production unit, if at least one, if not 2 or 3. And then through the cohort, we've been able to find at least 5 farmers, both in Minnesota and Wisconsin, that will hopefully be joining the production system over the next 2 years. And hopefully that number will continue to grow as we do more cohorts. We'll be doing them at least once a year, if not maybe a fall and a spring going forward eventually. But this has resulted in about 50,000 heritage breed chickens raised in a regenerative system in 2023, all in the Midwest. So it's a pretty cool thing to see. And we're trying to scale it up to closer to 100,000 as soon as possible, because that's what our processing facility is able to handle. So here's a kind of a little map. This is where we're really headquartered. So the red star is our Stacyville processing facility. So we're really focused on 300 miles or 3 hours and around that facility, mainly for the transportation of the birds. And we don't really want to transport live birds any longer than that. So this is where we're focusing. Iowa is really kind of our big untapped market. But I also like to highlight the star in Nebraska and South Dakota, which are some of our tribal partners, Makoche Ag in South Dakota. They're kind of developing their own hub similar to Stacyville on their own. So they're developing their own processing capacity and feeding their own community with their own regenerative farms. And then similar is a Ho-Chunk Ag on the Winnebago Reservation in Nebraska. And they've been really great to work with. And they come to our convergence meetings, which is similar to what Savannah Institute's doing here. And then we go and visit them and share a lot of technical assistance and just information in general. So we hope to see a lot more stars here coming up here in the next couple of years. So a couple profiles really quick. Fortunately, we don't have any farmers that can talk directly to you, but just to look at Feed the People. So they're in Northfield, Minnesota. It's actually a cooperative farm. So it's pretty cool to see kind of the different forms these farms take. So they have a single production unit. They're actually looking to scale up. They just built a road and are going to be building a second production unit, hopefully for 2024. But like I said, they're a cooperative. So there's 4 operators, and they also operate a cooperative compost pickup in Northfield that's getting quite big. And they're very active. They use all the proceeds from their chicken business that pretty much roll it back into the compost business. And they run both businesses together, and it's a pretty cool operation that they use. They have a very mature paddock. They have hazelnuts. It's not very many because they've been able to utilize a stand of forest that was already there, and so they're running chickens. These are hanging feeders, so feeders are hung from these. There's some shade cloth on there to provide some extra cover, but they have a really nice, well-established paddock. You can see there's a lot of straw for organic matter. We'll get into more of what the system looks like in a second here, but it's cool to see that they just utilize something that was already more or less covered by forest and an existing perennial system, and we're able to use poultry and start running them under there. And they produce some really wonderful chicken. Here's another farmer, Rodrigo Cala. So Cala Farm, they're up in northern Wisconsin. They're right on that 3-hour border that gets them access to the processing facility. Him and his family operate it. I think it's his teenage daughter that's mainly going to start taking over the chicken operation. But similarly, he has one production unit. He's about to finish a second for this year, and then is about to start construction on a third. And we're working with him on getting financing to get those up. But he produces some really nice chicken. He's kind of in a different situation where he's converting what would be considered a weedy paddock into something that will eventually have a multi-story canopy. You can see a hazelnut here with some really deep mulch. It's hard to get some of these perennials established regardless. It's really hard to get them when they're competing with grass. He's had some issues with loss, and we've had to help him replace a lot of the plants. Rabbits, if they're not protected with cages, it's like any perennial system. There's it's really tough in those first few years getting them established. But he's, hopefully in several years, this will look like a multi-canopy system with chickens running underneath it. So that's just kind of two quick profiles of some of the farmers in our system. But getting a little nerdy about the actual agroforestry aspect of it, this is another farm. So this would be organic compound outside of Northfield or Faribault in Minnesota. This is a planning document that they used. Doesn't look exactly like this yet. We'll get to see some pictures of their operation, but this is kind of how you can see the poultry paddock system, the Poultry-Centered Regenerative Agricultural System kind of fit as a single piece in a larger agroforestry system. So this was a really helpful exercise that they used to kind of plan their entire farm. So they were able to use the swales and the slope here to create some opportunities for annual production of grain or some alley cropping between the perennials here. But the chicken production is really, it needs to be kept efficient. So it's not necessarily conducive to these kind of larger changes in terrain. So they kept it up at the top of this ridge where they can keep the trucks can come in fill the feed bins. It's in a straight line. All the coops are directly next to each other. And each paddock is an 1.5 acres. So that's the footprint of a single one of these production units. But then, the idea is that one of the benefits is not only the cash flow of the chickens, so they'll be able to establish all these hazelnuts, but they can use the manure, which is almost like, black gold, and then you use that in the other agroforestry systems. They have another planting of hazelnuts down here that is actually their main planting. And it's really interesting seeing the difference in establishment between these. This is down in the valley, so they're a little more protected, and this is up exposed up on top of the ridge. And they were planted more or less at the same time, but these are, almost 12 feet tall, and these are still quite small, still getting established. We'll get to see some pictures of that. But this is a beautiful example of, a larger agroforestry system that's utilizing kind of the chickens as the engine, is the way Ray likes to describe it, where, an entire farm can necessarily be made out of the chicken production. It would take a lot of production units to make that happen, but it's really more about including the chickens to allow the cash flow of a perennial system that moves so slowly before you can get a first harvest of something like hazelnuts or, even sugar maple. We'll get into the Midwest species, so we can talk about that. So the idea of the system is that, we talk about hazelnuts quite a bit because they're native. They handle the chickens really well, and they will eventually produce an economically viable crop. Hopefully, we're trying to develop the Midwest hazelnut industry, but it doesn't have to just be hazelnuts. This system can really be dialed into kind of whatever your priorities are as a farmer. And what we're trying to do is, create an ecosystem of regenerative farmers where the chickens are just kind of a piece of that. So an example I like to give is like sugar maple. If you're interested in creating, the perfect density paddocks of, whatever it takes to create a maple syrup crop, that would fit perfectly well into a system like this, even with the hazelnut understory, where maybe the hazelnuts aren't the priority, but they're still an extra benefit. And the idea is regenerating the native ecosystem. So the chickens are a jungle fowl, and we're really just recreating what they grew up with, what they evolved with in the Midwest, and using native Midwest species. So we're kind of using the chickens and using their biology to more or less cash flow our way into restoration and creating a regenerative ecosystem of businesses that's based around a completely different type of farming, where you can establish a sugar maple stand, and however many years it takes to get to the point where you're actually getting maple syrup, you're running chickens under it, and you're able to get a little bit of extra cash flow. You're getting that fertility from the chickens that you can take and do other things like grow garlic and other annuals. So there's really a lot of opportunities here, but really the basis is the native ecosystem of the Midwest. So oaks, sugar maples, pecans. If your goal is really just restoration, you can just either place them directly into a native forest system, kind of like what Feed the People did, or you can recreate one out of a weedy field or a cornfield that's been abused for too long. But the idea is to create the cover that protects the chickens and regenerate not only the soil, but ecosystems for other native birds and just the native landscape in as a whole in general. So getting to the infrastructure of the system, this is kind of what a generic coop looks like. The maximum size of our flocks is 1,500. And we require 1 square foot per bird. So you always have to build on that scale. It doesn't have to be all the way up to 1,500, but it can't. We don't have flocks that are bigger than that. That's when you start seeing the stacked production units. But it's good to be long and narrow so that you can have good access in and out for chickens, good ventilation, good access to get in and out for harvest, and really the flashing to prevent either use a concrete floor, or if you're just using compact soil or clay, some sort of steel flashing that's buried to prevent things from being able to get in and out while the chickens are in there at night. But this is what one looks like in real life. So this is on an organic compound. This is right after it was pretty much completed. You can see these are the chicken doors coming out. This is where you'll be able to get a skid steer or a tractor in and out. But that's kind of what the generic dimensions of a coop looks like. This is what it looks like when it's ready for chickens to arrive. So they start in a brooder system, start in pine shavings. The chickens spend the first 4 weeks of their life inside before they're let out to range. But this is a really nice picture of everything kind of getting set up before the chickens arrive. And then this is what the brooding system looks like. So it's about 30 feet in diameter for the first 2 weeks or so before it's opened up, and then they have full range of the whole coop. But there's, we talk about ratios of waterers per bird and feeders per bird, and we do all that when we go through training, and what temperature is necessary. That's a big one, making sure there aren't any drafts. And then this is another farm. So this is actually a converted dairy barn. They had their first year running chickens this year, and they were very successful. They're in northern Wisconsin. They cut off the stanchions down towards the ground. We're able to frame out some chicken doors in the cinder block. And it's got an insulated roof, so it does well with heat changes. So it's been a really awesome to see them kind of do this experiment. This is what it looks like when they're more or less have the entire coop open before the doors open. So at the first 4 weeks, it's really just a matter of bedding management, and you're getting the coop, the paddocks ready. So you're more or less managing it with cover crop. So planting things in the fall that can be established, some winter wheat, oats in the spring, buckwheat in the summer, pretty much operating the paddocks like that in terms of just making sure that the ground is always covered before the chickens get out. But when they're in there for the first 4 weeks, it's just a matter of bedding management, make sure they have the right amount of feed. But then at week 5, the door is open, and there is a bit of range training. That's what we like to call it. So a few days before week 5, the doors just kind of open, and the chickens can kind of explore it on their own. But then as soon as in that first day of week 5, all the chickens are basically shooed out of the coop, so that no one is left in. All the feed and all the water is removed from the coop so that it's outside, and then the doors are shut. And so I think it's kind of funny to see these they're fully feathered, but these little runts of birds, they'll crowd up along the side of the coop at first. So it's important to make sure that the water and the feed is really close at the beginning. But then those first few days, you'll have to shoo them out, and then you turn the lights on before dusk, and then you got to shoo them back in. And then the second day, it'll be a little bit easier. And then the third day, it'll be a little bit easier. And then after 5 days to a week, they'll be able to do it on their own. But after that point, there is no feed or water that's in the coop anymore. It's all managed through the paddocks. And that's kind of what really helps to make sure that the whole paddock is ranged, is that the food is slowly moved farther and farther out from the coop. And that is what moves the chickens around. But they are given ground feed in these feeders. So they're hung from these sawhorse type systems that are built. But then farmers develop a regimen of sprouting grain. And that's really what makes kind of the system economically advantageous, or even competitive, really. Because if you're just feeding them ground feed, when chickens are ranging, they're moving around and they're burning energy, and you're never really going to be able to compete with a Cornish cross that's just sitting in a building and not moving around. And it comes down to just feed conversion ratios. But when you can sprout grain, so our farmers source small grains, just like wheat or barley or sunflowers or whatever they have access to. And generally that's, just a few cents per pound versus the dozens of cents per pound of the ground up feed, if not dollars per pound. So as the farmers kind of are able to figure out use pre-sprout grain every day, by soaking it or by dispersing it and covering it with straw, lots of organic matter. And then if you have an irrigation system, but then you're able to basically, the chickens will prefer that. They'll forage and they'll get a whole bunch of nutrients and protein from that sprouted grain, and it improves their digestion. It helps them digest the dried feed better. And then it really cuts back on what is the number one cost of the chicken production, which is the ground up feed. So it really is kind of dependent on the farmer, how productive their land is, how they're able to sprout the grain, what they have access to. That really kind of defines what that looks like on each of the farms. But that's a big part of the system, is the sprouted grain, and what kind of makes the chickens healthier, makes them less prone to disease, makes them put on weight better, makes them more nutrient dense. So it's a really big part of the system. And here's just some other really great pictures of just kind of what it looks like. A lot of straw, so making sure the ground is never covered or never bare. So either always managing it with cover crops, or making sure you're using straw and then sprouting the grain in the straw. And then this is actually right outside that dairy barn. So they don't have any perennial cover yet. So we recommend that you you can use the sawhorses. So you saw there was some shade cloth that can be used on the feeders, but they planted rows of corn and sunflowers. They drilled it in at 20 feet apart, 5 rows, and you can you can alternate corn and sunflowers, or you combine it. But it provides that kind of simulated canopy and gives them the nice cover that they need when it's hot, but also from predators. But it also looks really nice. And maybe you can get some corn out of it and then sprout it for the chickens if you want to, or something like that. But then this is what a mature paddock, the mature paddock. So this is the original. This is Finca Marisol. So this is where Ray did all of his R&D right outside of Northfield. So this is actually a smaller barn. So that's another, I kind of mentioned that it doesn't have to be the full 1,500 square feet. So I don't know the exact size, but he was running flocks of 500, 700 birds. And it can be shrunk if you're size limited, space limited. You already have an existing barn that can be retrofitted and it's only a certain size. It really, as long as you're meeting that 1 square foot per bird inside, and then 40 square foot per bird outside in the paddocks. And that's divided in 2. So 20 on one side and 20 on the other. You can do it at any size really, but you can see the rows of hazelnuts with some other natives. I'm not sure what all is kind of growing in here, but you can, if you get volunteers of oak or basswood, or when I was at Organic Compound, they had a bunch of volunteer cottonwoods, and he was talking about whether or not he was gonna let them stay or not. So it's kind of fun that these are. You can create, whatever regenerative perennial system you want that has chickens running under it. So this is, I don't know if you remember the planning document. So up here, up top, can everybody still see this picture? Yeah, okay. This is those paddocks up on top of the ridge. They've only got 2 coops built so far. They're planning to do another 2. Then here are those swales, and then they've got their other their hazelnuts planted in the other fields down here. But it's absolutely beautiful, and they've just a part of it. So now I'll pass it off to Diane. She'll talk about a little bit about the processor.
Louis, there were a couple of questions I've seen come up maybe before we move into the next section here.
Sure. Absolutely.
I can read them out loud to you. So how long are birds on pasture prior to slaughter?
So it's their entire lives are about 10 weeks. So it's 4 weeks inside and then 6 weeks outside. So from week 5 to week 10 they're ranging. They're outside during the day and then inside at night. And so they get harvested at 70 days.
Perfect. And then the coops are stationary. How long does it take for the pasture to recover between flocks? So maybe just explain the paddock management between the 2.
Yeah, again, that's kind of depends on where the farmer's at, how productive the ground is already. Even just a year of having the chickens, you'll be able to see that the grain will sprout better, the ground will hold moisture more. But it's anywhere from a few days to a week, really. And it's a matter of, the second the chickens are in one, you're managing the one that they just left or haven't been in yet. So you're immediately sprouting grain. So because you want kind of that staggered of grain that's just sprouting, grain that's been sprouting a couple days. So they kind of have stuff to scratch through. Maybe some of it will get established and put more roots in the ground. So it's really, you don't really want it more than maybe a week, but at first it'll probably be a lot quicker back and forth because the chickens will just kind of decimate stuff. But as the paddocks regenerate and become more productive, it starts going up, but it really relies on the farmer's observation and just kind of dialing in that sprouted grain system and figuring out what cover crops work and when that goes in, and moving the chickens around the whole paddock with the feed so that they're not isolated in one spot. So a few days to a week.
Perfect. Yeah, I've always been amazed when I come back down a week later and see how much has regenerated in the paddock the chickens were just in. Another one regarding just how the chickens, have we run it anywhere over the 2 years in one place yet? Curious about the nutrification, defoliation of the paddock areas. Yeah,
so RAA's farm, that this is about almost 2 decades.
Yep, 15 years.
Diane mentioned our science team. So we have a whole bunch of scientists that are going into RAA's farm, this old farm, his new farm, where he's converting abused corn and soybean fields into a system like this. And then we have other farms that have been doing it for, somewhere in between. So they're taking measurements at all of these. They're taking soil samples, and greenhouse gas samples, and water samples, and finding really awesome stuff that, RAA already knew, and that, the indigenous community already understood what was happening, but now it's just being verified, and we're able to codify it into the system and show it in Western terms, I guess. But I don't have the numbers, but I've been at their presentations, and it's very cool. And seeing the organic matter shoot up, and how much the water holding capacity, and all of the things that they're measuring are showing really cool stuff that's happening in the soil.
Wonderful. Thanks, Louis. And Brandon, I think I'll answer your question as I go through the next couple of slides talking about the processor and where these chickens are being marketed. But regarding breed variety for regenerative poultry, Royal Greys, Sazos, and then Freedom Rangers are the 3 main, that's correct, right, Louis, that the 3 main birds that the farmers are currently using and where we have done the most research. So in order to be part of the Poultry-Centered Regenerative Agriculture system, there are the certain standards that Lewis explained regarding the ground cover always being there, and then the spatial standards and when they will be ranging, and all the feed going out on that 5th week. But there are other things that through the RAA, we do a lot of research and development before prescribing them or having them be included in the standard. And so one of those things still under development, which is not a requirement yet, is with the sprouted grain aspect of the system. So that is going to be tested and researched to make sure that it's a viable option for a farmer before it would actually be included in the regenerative poultry standard. So Lewis,
and he's doing a lot of that research himself, which is cool with his flocks.
Yeah, it's awesome. And if anybody ever wants to come visit any of our farms, please reach out to us. There'll be a whole host of public events this year. For me, it's really one of those things, coming out to see it on the farm, like anything, is really where the transformation happens. But really kind of going back to this overview of ecosystem development, we are really looking to codify not only the blueprint on a landscape and how that is engineered, but how can this be built so that all the different parts of the supply chain are coordinated and anchored in a way that keeps the wealth within the community. And sometimes as the director, I feel very challenged because poultry is been so exploited and is so industrialized in this country. So when we come up against these very large systems from a place that we're working with small and mid-sized farmers, a lot of people either laugh at us or they're very concerned because this is a different approach to thinking, especially when it comes to livestock production. And I would say that that can be true too with the exploitation that happens at the processing level, which when you look at livestock is a very hidden cost to the overall supply chain. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the great strides that the team of leaders down at Stacyville Poultry Processing are undergoing in both starting a USDA inspected and third parties certified organic inspected processing facility. So Stacyville, Iowa is about 6 miles south of the border of Minnesota. And so as Lewis mentioned, that really is a core place that we draw the concentric circle around for producer recruitment. So with the processing facility being up and running now for 3 years and an awesome team established, we are in a place that we can actively go recruit and train new farmers to come into the system. When we look at it, when we opened up the processing facility, it was clear that there was not a place that farmers that were raising poultry could bring their birds. So right now, we process both the chickens that come out of the regenerative poultry system, which Lewis mentioned was about 50,000 this year. But then we're also working with about 40 other farmers. Some of them have brands that they sell to co-ops. Other people are just raising chickens for their own food. So it really ranges from a farmer bringing 5 chickens in to up to that 1,000 to 1,500 mark at the processing facility. So that's a service that we're working to actively advertise because we do have capacity, and Stacyville is now scheduling for 2024 if you're within that range. The name of I just saw your questions here. The name of that farm that was in production for 15 years is Finca Marisol, and it recently was sold to the business administrator for the RAA. So it's going to continue to stay in the ecosystem. And then the new farm that Ray has moved to is called Salvatierra Farms, and we can drop that link in the chat too. So this is right now there's 14 staff that operate the processing facility, and we've undergone developing a HACCP food safety system that continues to improve every time. So we work, for those that don't know, when you're doing this level of processing, you need to have a USDA inspector on site. So we've been developing a really great relationship, and they're very excited to see what's happening and the progress we're making at the facility. We did put in an application for a local meat capacity grant this year, which we are still waiting to find out if we will be receiving that grant. But we made some major capital equipment improvements this year, including inventory tracking and then a shackle line conveyor system. So if you look at organic certification for livestock standards, both on regenerative and animal humane, processing is a big part of what will certify that chicken or product as regenerative. And so when you think about ecosystem coordination, we're constantly talking both with the processor, with our customers, and with the farmers to understand where the market is going and how we can bring value to that. So the role of the nonprofit is really to come in and de-risk some of those early advancements needed to make that happen. So I think what's happening here at Stacyville is really exciting to see of what it looks like to go and roll up your sleeves and see what it takes to run a processor and do it with integrity. And I think we hope to have that be a model for folks that are looking for new markets to think about leveraging that aspect of the supply chain and bringing that within the ecosystem as a whole. You can go on to the next slide, Lewis. So another big driver and something very notable for the ecosystem that we wanted to highlight today is that Tree Range Farms is now available for to buy on shelves in about 40 different stores. Rahi has moved into the CEO role. And when the role that they play is the aggregation of this product for the farmers that are in the system. So farmers have the opportunity when they are raising chickens to the standards that Lewis laid out to contract with Tree Range Farms. When that process happens, they do have the opportunity to save some of their birds. So if you wanted to keep 10% of your birds to be able to sell directly or for your family, that is something that happens during the reconciliation process. But the role that Tree Range plays is organizing the transportation off farm to the processor, and something that the processing facility has the capacity to do is the secondary processing. So we do package per the customer's request, different cuts of meat. So you can get your thighs and your breasts separated are all together. So that really we can be flexible to meet where the market needs are. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lewis. Something that's really important to highlight is that the local procurement partnerships that we're able to secure this year through Tree Range is working with other nonprofits that are selling chicken or buying chicken rather for their for clients or underserved folks that would not be able to afford the price point that the regenerative chicken is currently on the shelves for. So that's been a really exciting connection, both in Minnesota and I know Wisconsin is just released their RFP for that. So we're hoping to see some Wisconsin purchase orders come through utilizing that program as well. So I think that's the other last piece of it is that we are hosting our 3rd annual Regenerative Poultry Convergence. It's going to take place in Carleton College, Northfield, Minnesota. We had it there last year. The Savannah Institute was present and an awesome sponsor. We focus on 2 different aspects of the work. The first day is really going to be a deep dive for folks thinking about integrating livestock poultry on their landscape. And we'll cover all the different establishment of paddocks, coop construction, farmer services. And then the second day, we'll focus more on these different business ecosystems that are developing everything from what processing looks like for the future for this system, and then also a federal grant that we're overseeing through the Climate Smart Commodities Program. Ultimately, the goal is to start to see how different farmers in this regenerative space can come together, both on the grain side and develop aggregating and mixing facilities for these poultry farmers, all the way through to the perennial crops that some of you are probably growing and raising, and then also continuing to build out clean chicken markets in this region. So please, save the dates, March 21st, 22nd. We're going to get registration open here in the next couple weeks, and would love to have you join to learn more about the work we're doing. So I saw a couple more questions in the chat. Please feel free to jump in if you have others too. Has anyone done anything on downscaling this to a small farm, hobby farm scale? Few dozen chicken harvesting eggs. Any published info on that?
RAA's is the smallest that I know of. I mean, we always talk about that it can be any size. I mean, he'll joke that you could have one sad chicken with 1 square foot inside and 40 square feet outside, and it would be acceptable. So theoretically, it's possible. I don't think anyone's really sized it down. I know they've looked into eggs quite a bit, especially at first, but because of the climate up here, they did a lot of work in trying to keep egg production year round. But it was just too intensive, and it just got too cold, and it just didn't really work out. So in warmer, drier climates where it's warm year round, it's kind of where they talk about where egg production in a system like this can be. But yeah, it's definitely suited to a homesteading kind of style situation. But yeah, I don't know if anybody's gone at it like that quite yet.
And I think too, with the Regen Ag Alliance, really the foundation of this work is the economies of scale and a larger impact. So we're really looking to develop a supply chain that is able to meet market demands of certain sizes. We're trying to look at be able to aggregate this amount of chicken to have that a large impact on many different farms, so that there could be a world in which we'd be able to meet an institutional buyer looking to buy chicken through this system. So that continues to be our focus, but the overall agronomic model can be applied on a farm-by-farm basis as people want to, but the systems change we're seeking to create through the nonprofit is that larger scale.
Well said.
Awesome. We have several minutes here to do follow-up questions. We've been keeping track of some of those. So if I'll go through and read them. And if folks have other questions, you can drop them in the chat here. One of them was, do you have a minimum flock size for processing?
Right now, I know that they process a farmer's 5 chickens. So I think we're trying to make good friends and neighbors in that area, but the sweet spot, I'd say, is 200 to 1,500 birds.
I have a follow-up question on that. Do you have an idea of a per bird cost? And that probably depends on how many are being processed, but just so folks can get an idea.
Yeah, that's so just for whole bird, just a bird bagged without any secondary cutting, is about $5 per bird. And then it does, if you have larger amounts of birds, that price does go down. And then it really depends too on how you want your birds processed. It's very interesting right now with the partnership that we have with Tree Range and them being out in the market and seeing what the appetite is. There's about 31% of the bird right now that there really is not a market for. And so that's one of the pieces that we're working for whole animal utilization. You spend all this time and energy stewarding this healthy, awesome bird. How do you make sure that that value gets translated all the way across the marketplace. So there's some really interesting work being done at the federal level about meat procurement and trying to transfer some of the meat purchasing that happens to small, mid-sized processors for so that the whole animal can be utilized. So I think we're in a very good position to lead some of those conversations, and would love it if anybody wants to start like a chicken broth company and contract with us for frames, because those are the sorts of entrepreneurial activities that are really going to drive the system forward.
Awesome, thanks. Next question is, have you explored a similar system for layers?
There has been an exploration. That was some of the early research that was done even before RAA started. That was done here in Minnesota, and was both from an animal welfare standpoint and, again, from a commercialization standpoint, not the right area to do it in. We certainly, I know Tree Range is looking, that they have the model and kind of blueprint design of what it would look like for a layer system at a commercial scale, and really kind of looking at that Kansas region, Southeast region for something of that nature.
Any exploration for using ducks or geese?
I haven't heard them mentioned. I mean, they're require a whole bunch of different things. I mean, they're waterfowl, so that's a whole different thing. Yeah, I mean, I know there's talk about sheep, in kind of an adjacent system. That's part of RAA's long-term farm plan. But yeah, no, nothing about waterfowl. No, but I don't see why not. I guess you'd probably have to have a pond in each paddock or something like that.
I do know there's some pretty interesting stuff in the Pacific Northwest looking at like ducks and geese in that system and environment, but not particularly that we've led or been a part of.
Any concerns with H5N1 bird flu?
RAA will talk about how the health of the bird comes first and foremost. And that's true. The healthier the bird, the better their immune systems, the more, the better they are at fighting off a possible infection. So no, I mean, in the material that I've read that's been produced by RAA, they'll talk about the fact that we are producing habitat for native birds and migratory birds, and that's kind of the whole scare tactic around home flocks and avian flu and things like that. But in terms of fighting disease, the healthier the bird, the better. So we haven't seen any issues, I guess, as in the time that this has been going on, and the outbreaks that have happened. There haven't been any flocks that I know of that have been impacted by it. So as we grow, we'll find out. Hopefully that will be bore out in data. So
yeah, we've actually explored. The first year we did the convergence, we had a vet come down from the U of M and just discussed, it is something to be very aware of, and biosecurity hazards are extremely important for farmers to follow and have a plan for on their farm, both on our farms or any person raising birds at this scale. But we are interested and have talked about doing more research and development as the birds raised in this system have medicinal herbs that they are introduced to, both garlic, apple cider vinegar, that are part of the system. So that medicinal health component is something that we don't have any data or verification on, but we would like to explore that avenue with other institutions and researchers interested in evaluating that. Another piece on animal welfare, I just wanted to mention, if you go to the RAA YouTube channel, Dr. Leonie Jacobs out of Virginia Tech, I believe our University of Virginia, I can't remember right now, but she has been studying the birds in this system and really looking at the different aspects that for the birds' happiness and health and how they express their geoevolutionary expressions. And so also she did some extensive research on scoring of their pads too in this system. So I think that's pretty exciting to have somebody looking at it, comparing pasture to this tree range system.
Thanks for that. I'm going to skip down a little bit and go to a question that is, have you had resistance to use of your processing plant from surrounding Iowa farmers? I'm wondering why there are so few cooperators in Iowa. Iowa also has a robust LFP program, if that's something you could take advantage of. If you could speak to that.
Absolutely. Thanks for telling me about the LFPA. Really Minnesota, since that's where we're headquarters, where we started, and now with the success we've seen, we really see the opportunity, and I feel like it's our mission well done from an ecosystem level when we're able to take chicken raised by emerging farmers and get it to people that would not otherwise be able to access it. So from my standpoint, that's just been an awesome program. And then regarding Iowa, we just really haven't had the capacity or time to do the outreach there. We work pretty closely with Practical Farmers of Iowa and looking forward to creating more bridges just with the presence of the processing facility being located in Iowa. So no resistance by any means. And I think as customers come in and start to have an experience of having processing with us, we're hoping they start to ask more questions about the regenerative system and maybe want to transition from a conventional to a regenerative way of raising birds.
Great. Just a quick note, we're 5 minutes out from the next session. Folks are welcome to stay and chat birds here, but just wanted to do that timekeeping and make sure we give a big thank you to the presenters today. But we'll keep going here as long as folks are still going. So next question, have you considered packaging the less marketable parts of the chickens for sale to individuals to make their own broth?
Yeah, I think Tree Range has reached out to a couple of folks regarding that aspect. And, you know, really the interesting thing is when you start to think about where the nutritional benefits of the chicken are held, it's really in the organs, meat, and hearts. And so there's a lot of opportunity there to think about certain cultural groups of folks. That's why they tend to eat that part of the chicken too. And so there's a lot of unexplored markets right now. We haven't found somebody to make any stock or broth yet, but certainly something we're open to.
Great. Yeah, some tree range chicken broth would be pretty good right about this time of the season, I think. I know we've had several snuffly noses on Zoom calls lately for folks. Next question is, the use of chickens as the fertility for your tree crops is really the use of grain inputs as fertility for your farm. This model would seem to need to be co-located with sustainable grain production. What connections does RAA have with grain farmers?
Love that question. It's the next natural evolution, right? Processing was the first enterprise that we needed to tackle. And really, in order to scale, having that connection with grain farmers, as you mentioned, is going to be vital. Right now, most of the ecosystem gets their feed through either a local feed provider, Almond Custom Feed, that's a miller, also Cashin Feed, which is a larger feed supplier. Though that has been where we've been sourcing feed. And one thing to note, which is interesting for farmers that contract with Tree Range, is that Tree Range actually covers the cost of feed and chicks up front. And so that does the farmers not paying that out of pocket when they sign a contract. So that is one thing I think is unique to the system. And then the other piece on grain is that the Climate Smart Commodities grant I mentioned, RAA, it's our first federal grant. So it's been quite the first federal grant, as it's a very large administrative lift. But the goal of that program will be to enroll producers that are doing 3-year rotations of grains. So introducing small grains such as oats into their maybe traditional corn and soy rotation. And then once those producers are enrolled, we'll be tracking that grain development over the 5 years to work to build out supply chain relationships. So having that go, what can be sold to food grade grain can be sold to food grade buyers. And then also there's the secondary grain that can't be sold. And our hope is to develop relationships where that's going to be bagged and aggregated in order to be a feed supply for poultry farmers in this system. We're focused, the enrollment for that program, we do have something on our website, can drop in the chat if you want to learn more. But the enrollment for that program will be focused here in the Midwest.
Love all these great questions, and I have lots of my own too. But yeah, 4 o'clock here, folks are going to jump over to the other one. We've got another one here that's comment and question, I guess. I would love to go to a tree range system and like the way this one looks. There's an obvious cost associated with construction of the coops, then the additional weeks of production for non-CC type birds, Cornish cross type birds, obviously means weeks more of feeding out total mixed ration, which in our case is organic feed. Are there any numbers regarding those costs, what the example farms market is, and the price point required, labor estimates, et cetera, anything like that, or insight into points where savings could occur when contrasting mobile coops on open pasture, noted feed cost offset, et cetera. So a lot there. I also, the comparison between portable coops, I think is a really interesting question, because I think that would be the model that a lot of our folks here are probably familiar with, and what I've done in the past on my own farm, pulling those things around. Obvious benefits and potentially drawbacks for that too.
Yeah, I mean, the costs of the system, I feel like for any perennial system are really, upfront, and it's definitely the biggest barrier. And dealing with farmers that are already in the system that want to scale up, put up another coop, the costs associated with that. The example we showed is pretty much a cream of the crop scenario where it's all new materials. Maybe some of the labor was done by themselves. But it is an expensive building. But then when if you are able to produce some of your own labor, if you locally source the materials, if you can find a farmer who doesn't want the tin on some building, and you can take that tin and put it up around your building. I'm excited about, well, I guess I shouldn't be excited about all the dairy barns that are sitting empty in Wisconsin, especially, but the Kaufmans, like I showed, they had an old dairy barn that they were able to convert. And unfortunately, there's so many dairy farms that have all this infrastructure that what are they going to do? Well, maybe they could become regenerative poultry farms. So, we're working with folks like the Iroquois Valley and some other grant underwriters, and we're educating the FSA to make it so that they understand kind of what a profile of this farm looks like, that you're joining an ecosystem that has a guaranteed market, that we're providing all the technical assistance, almost like a mentorship, and we're trying to make it so that our training cohort will become like a accredited, certifiable certification class that you come out of, and then show that to the FSA and say, this counts as maybe so many years of production experience, and that gets you the FSA loan at the good rate that allows you to get a building put up. So we're trying to assist in a lot of those ways. We do have numbers from farms that we have shared during a lot of our training sessions to show that their tools, their spreadsheet tools that they can plug in their own numbers and play around with. We're not trying to sell this as like a rich, quick scheme. It's not like this isn't the end all be all, like join our chicken scheme and you're going to be rolling in it with all the, it is, it's a piece of a larger whole. We encourage our farmers to come up with a whole farm plan. It's those that are already more or less bought in. You want to have a regenerative system. You want to regenerate the ecosystem. You want a perennial system already. This helps you cash flow that system. And also it's not a full-time job. Those are a whole flock shouldn't take more than 80 to 100 hours. So over 10 weeks, 80 hours over 10 weeks, you can have another job. You can have other farm priorities. There's the big pushes in terms of harvest and range training and, those first observations and really just getting stuff dialed in as you're getting your system set up. But it's another kind of benefit of the system. You can be a dentist and, as long as you're getting those chicken doors open at dawn and making sure you can have a regenerative system while you're going to your office job. Or if you're a full-time regenerative farmer, you're alley cropping and you're, have your cash crops that the chickens are just a part of. So, it's like any other farming, really, especially conventional, where there's a lot of the upfront equipment costs or infrastructure costs, but, we're doing our best to help alleviate that, but then providing the assistance along the way, so that it can kind of fit whatever your priorities are and scale.
Yeah, I would just highlight too, this is a tool for transformation and each farm is unique. So I think that's one of the things I've loved to watch the 9 farmers that are part of the system and the other tribal communities that are thinking about utilizing this as a way of growing food. Is each farmer has their own priorities and aspirations of how they want to use it and how they want to integrate it. And I think that's a testament and benefit of the system overall. And ultimately, the system was designed for social impact so that small and mid-sized farmers could have an opportunity to engage in ownership and wealth building. And so I love that there's complementary parts on the environmental side, but also on the social impact side is where we start to see those economic development case studies come from. And if anybody, if you're a farmer interested and want to learn more, reach out to us. Louis, do you want to just drop your email in there for folks? And then I did drop into the chat Regen Poultry Training. That's the body of work that the cohort will go through. So we'll have a second cohort for farmers to join this fall. And again, I'd say come to the Convergence if you want to learn more. You'll meet all the farmers in the system right now as well in March.
Awesome. Thank you for that info. There was one other maybe quick question. Are there published enterprise budgets for folks to play with?
Not published. We've given them to our first cohort and just for the chickens. So just for the broilers, we have numbers. They're not necessarily public. So maybe join a training. We can give you access to that. But yeah, it was developed. It's all RAA's numbers. And so.
Awesome. Well, that's the last of the questions that I saw. There's some good comments there in the chat. We can keep going or wrap it up here. So thanks again, Louis and Diane. Sure appreciate you being here and sharing. Exciting. I really love especially the kind of social and financial part of this, really the desire to make things viable for small farms. That's such a critical piece of the puzzle here. And I know you've been great partners with SI over the years, and we're just excited to continue that partnership. So thanks again for doing what you do.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for spending your time with us. Love to reach out and engage with you more. So don't be shy.
Sounds good.